Hello, DawgNation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And we are go for 2 in 22, covering so many angles on Georgia versus Ohio State in today's show, which means that we're going to react to some of the stuff that happened yesterday. While we're doing the show, there's another press conference ongoing. We'll catch up with Connor Riley here in a little bit. Connor will give us some insight into what Georgia defensive coaches and players have to say looking ahead to Ohio State. We'll hear from Jake Fromm on today's show. He'll give us a little bit of insight about this Buckeyes matchup. I'm also going to talk to Jake a little bit about Ra Thomas and Dominic Lovett, the two transfer receivers that Georgia's taking on for next season. So we'll kind of squeeze in a 2023 question in the midst of all this go for 2 in 22 talk. Maybe some good news for Georgia on the injury front. We'll try to see if we can figure out what that means. And admittedly, I'm going to read a lot into a very short video, but that's what we do around here sometimes. So we'll do that. ESPN is hyping Georgia to the moon right now, but maybe it's more appropriate than you might think. We'll kind of cover that base here a little bit too. We'll hear from Ryan Day on today's show, his thoughts on Georgia. We are going to try to cram so much into the next few minutes, so you can judge us at the end and see how well we did. But on a show this big, so packed with content, you got to get started early to get it all going. So let's do that right now. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There seems to be one question on the mind of Georgia fans here right now, and as you might imagine, Kirby Smart is in no big hurry to try to answer it. Obviously, all eyes kind of pointing to the game on Saturday between Georgia and Ohio State. And there's a million different angles for how this game's going to be determined, whether or not that Georgia can, win this, stay on pace to go for 2 in 22. And one of those right now kind of relates to the injury situation. Warren McClendon, your starter at right tackle. Ladd McConkey, one of your most important wide receivers. These are guys that left the SEC championship game with injury. And when Kirby Smart spoke a couple of weeks ago, he was asked the question about McConkey and McClendon, and he didn't have a whole lot of specifics to offer at the time. They had not been practicing yet. We were told that. And that's one of those things that maybe kind of fills you with angst a little bit if you're a Georgia fan. And yet now you fast forward to game week. All of a sudden now it's time to get serious about what your game plan is, who your personnel available are, and get ready for this game against Ohio State. So with that in mind, when Georgia arrived in Atlanta yesterday to begin its bowl week festivities and its game preparations for Ohio State, the first question out of the box for Kirby Smart in his introductory press conference to begin this Peach Bowl week related to Ladd McConkey and Warren McClendon. And Kirby Smart may have set a record for about the shortest possible answer you can give to a question like this. Let you hear Kirby responding to a direct question with a little bit of an evasive answer. This is Kirby on that topic.
Yeah, Kirby, just want to ask at this point in the week what the availability looks like for Ladd and Warren.
Yeah, we're excited to get those guys hopefully back, and we'll see how they do this week.
So we're excited to get those guys hopefully back, and we'll see how they do this week. I don't know that you can read much into that one way or another. I think it's kind of designed to be that way. On the one hand, he's excited and hopeful. Does that mean that the news is good? But on the other hand, he's looking to see how they do this week, which means has he not seen enough from them yet to have any kind of indication one way or another? That is literally, I would say, a phrase kind of designed to be able to be interpreted on either side of that. Kirby trying to kind of play sort of coy with all this, as you might imagine a coach would want to do. That's obviously his prerogative to do that. But here's the one thing you got to know, is that this week is unlike most weeks for Georgia and, frankly, for Ohio State. Bowl games are just far more public than most other college football games are. We're going to hear more from Kirby on this topic a little bit later on about how different a week like this is. And because of the world we've been living in the last couple of years, kind of coming away from the coronavirus pandemic, it's been a long time since a bowl week has felt like a true bowl week used to feel. Even last year's college football playoff, when Georgia went down to Miami to play the Orange Bowl, a lot of the public events that are supposed to take place, by public I don't really mean open to the general public. I mean a lot of the events that are taking place that the media is invited to attend, a lot of that stuff last year against Michigan ended up being canceled because we were kind of in the middle of whatever variant thing that was going on at the time. I don't even remember at this point in time. But a lot of even last year, some of that kind of stuff where the media would have been able to chance to sort of be witnessing practice and spotting players and kind of interacting kind of a public, in-person way. I keep saying public. I mean to say in person. Kind of an in-person way with the Georgia players. A lot of that didn't happen. So this year in 2022, you've got a little bit more of what the bowl world used to be. So it is very hard to keep certain things a secret if that's what you want to keep. You're just going to see players spotted more frequently. You're going to hear from more players in kind of a press conference type setting than you typically do. And so whatever the status of like McClendon and McConkey is for the game on Saturday, I would say that this week Georgia fans may have more access to actually learn information about that than they typically might in a regular situation. I'll give you an example of this. And if you're not watching on video, my apology here. You're not going to be able to see this, but I'm going to describe this to you. And if you want to check out, we'll have this in like the DawgNation YouTube page and things like that. You can see what I'm about to show you. So you have these like bowl events that take place. These are like sort of the team bonding events. They're kind of Chamber of Commerce style events. And every bowl has them. They're sort of designed to make the host city look good, fun type stuff. So yesterday, there was one of these at the College Football Hall of Fame. We'll show some of this to you later on in the show as just kind of a way of saying, here's what Georgia's been up to. But when Georgia arrives for this event last night at the CFB Hall, they are getting off the buses the same way they do before football games, anything like that. And a couple of folks had kind of spotted this. In fact, we've already had some people in our comment section already talking about this morning. Let's show this short video here. So these are the buses arriving in Atlanta at the College Football Hall of Fame for this event. And as you see folks getting off here, one of the things you're going to spot here in a moment is going to be Georgia wide receiver Ladd McConkey. Now, it's very, very short, and you can't quite see from, like, say, the waist down, so it's a little bit difficult to tell, exactly how nimbly he's walking. But the sense that I get, there's folks getting off. McConkey is going to get off here in just a moment. We are absolutely kind of doing Zapruder-style breakdown of a couple of seconds of a player walking. But nonetheless, you're going to see this here coming up in a moment. It starts right now. Here is McConkey coming down the stairs. Seems to be walking just fine. Does not seem to be wincing as he's stepping. There you go. We've now frozen the frame on Ladd McConkey, and you see him walking. Tate Ratledge getting off the bus right after him. But Ladd McConkey just walked by, and the best that I could tell seemed to be walking fine. Now, it is not my intention to report. That means that Ladd McConkey is fully healthy and a full go for the Peach Bowl on Saturday. That would be a dumb thing even for me to try to do. But the point is that this is bowl week. And so the idea that the only thing we're going to have to judge the health of players like Warren McClendon or Ladd McConkey are the words of Kirby Smart. This is one of those weeks that's just not quite the case. You're going to be a couple of 15-minute viewing periods for the media to watch practice. And obviously the teams themselves don't like that. Georgia and Ohio State, I'm sure they don't. But this is just kind of thing that the bowl does. And the benefit to the fan is you're just going to have more information about Georgia, more information about Ohio State, more information going into a big game like this than you typically would get. So bottom line here is that Kirby Smart gave the kind of answer on Ladd McConkey and Warren McClendon you would typically expect to get, which is we'll kind of see how it goes this week. And frankly, that's probably the honest answer, that there probably are some determinations still to be made about how healthy either one of these dudes is for the game coming up on Saturday. But just for fun, we did spot McConkey here yesterday, and we wanted to show some of that to you, and so we'll kind of see how that plays out. Now, to shift gears and talk about something completely different for a moment, I thought that ESPN had a very interesting story. I read it this morning. I guess it must have popped up yesterday afternoon, last night, something like that, where the headline is, and is written by Mark Schlabach and Alex Scarborough, how Kirby Smart built Georgia into another Alabama. And like one of the, I guess the big lines from the story was basically, you're looking at Kirby Smart trying to build Georgia into a dynasty, much the same way that Alabama has kind of been a dynasty in college football. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, this story is very much worth your time. It's actually kind of an interesting look. It's long. It's very, very long. But it kind of starts with Kirby helping Alabama win the 2015 national championship and then making the transition over to Georgia. Greg McGarry's quoted in here. Jeb Blazevich, former Georgia tight end's quoted in here. You have a lot of voices. Obviously, Kirby Smart's not going to give you very much, if anything at all. I don't believe he was directly quoted in any of this. But it's kind of a long look at how Georgia got from Kirby being hired to where Georgia is here right now. Now, there is an element of this that feels like a lot of rat poison, right? It's like, Georgia's the next Alabama. Well, can Georgia actually win this second national championship before people do that? Stetson Bennett did an interview on ESPN television where, some of the same kind of stuff is sort of talked about how great, Georgia has a chance to be. And I thought Stetson gave a really good answer to this, where he said, hey, we'll talk about the history when all this is said and done. That the historic question is a relevant question of, what would it mean to win this second national championship? But we're actually going to be more comfortable addressing that after it happens, which I think is a really good answer by Stetson. He and Kirby both were on SportsCenter, I guess, yesterday. But here's what I'm going to tell you. For as irritating as some of this kind of is, especially for those who are really on guard against rat poison, which has never been that big of a deal for me, but for some people who are like really on guard against that sort of feels like, just too much rat poison from ESPN. And even for someone like me who, generally speaking, doesn't really care about the rat poison stuff, it does sort of feel like a major about face. Like before the season began, I couldn't find anybody among the national media to give Georgia a fair shake at all. The national media at the time was in love with teams like Ohio State. Ohio State was ranked ahead of Georgia on the basis of every single one of these official polls and unofficial polls and, writers with any kind of national following whatsoever. It was unanimously assumed that Ohio State was going to be better than Georgia. Now, all of a sudden, we've gotten to the game, 13-0 Georgia against 12-1 Ohio State, and there's this huge about face where everyone's completely changed their mind, but no one really offers an explanation for why they've changed their mind, which I think is, kind of interesting. So even for someone like me who doesn't really care about the rat poison stuff, there's an element of stories like this dropping right before the game that even feel a little bit irritating for somebody like me. But I was thinking just before our show began today, and the thought that came to my mind is that I do believe it's appropriate to cast the right narrative before a game like this, to sort of establish the storyline that is going in place. And we talked about this yesterday, that Georgia for a long time has been the team trying to topple a dynasty. That's really been the story since Kirby Smart's been here. And frankly, it was kind of the story for Mark Richt for the sort of the final years of his time at Georgia there too. That Alabama had built itself up into a behemoth, and Georgia wasn't going to be everything it could be until it toppled Alabama. And you know how long and arduous that journey kind of turned out to be, and then finally it culminated in the national championship win last year. But as we said on yesterday's show, now the storyline is different. Alabama's nowhere to be found. The dynasty, at least for the moment, truly has been toppled. It really is a case now where Georgia's trying to build itself into a dynasty, whether we want to call it, the next Alabama or just the new Georgia, however you want to define it. That is what this is. That empires have been toppled, and now Georgia has a chance to become an empire. And obviously, it's not appropriate to celebrate the idea of that until it actually takes place, if it does indeed take place. That's what Go for Two in 22 is all about. But it's pretty obvious that that's what Georgia's playing for. In other words, this isn't just another chance at winning a national championship. This isn't just another season. This is the kind of thing that could change the way people perceive Georgia, maybe even forever. Change the way that people look at the players in this team, change the way that people look at the coaches on this team. This is one of those things that would have the opportunity to rewrite history for the Georgia Bulldogs. So it's a little bit weird to see an outlet like ESPN showing so much love for the Dogs, but it's also, I guess, somewhat understandable as a way of making the average person not connect to one of these two teams to understand the true stakes for the Peach Bowl. That Georgia's trying to win a second straight national championship. And by doing so, would put itself into the kind of rare category that most teams in college football can never dream of being in. The challenge is a significant one. Ohio State's a good team, and whatever happens after that is not guaranteed either. But the opportunity at true historic greatness does stand in front of these Dogs. So it's one of the reasons why this game and this week has such a big feel to it. The stakes are high for Georgia. They have a national championship in hand, but the players and coaches on this roster would tell you they are still hungry for more. And who are we to say they won't go out and get it done all over again? My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Good to have you with us no matter how you get to us today, live on video. 9:45 for our first and 15 at DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app. Then 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. Those are all our video platforms. And, of course, radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Great to be back with our radio friends here today. And, of course, podcasts, Apple, Spotify, all kinds of podcast platforms. We're happy to have you with us there as well. We try to make this show available on as many different kind of platforms as we can, and we're just so thankful that so many of you have found a way to find us. So really, really appreciate all of that. And of course, we wouldn't be able to do what we do I wouldn't be able to communicate with you each and every day if not for great sponsors. And among the best are our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. They've been with us for a long time. I am so proud of our partnership, and I love what they do for you there as well. Because let's face it, a lot of you, and listen, I don't make a lot of this, but it is true. A lot of you are becoming acquainted with one of the things that Engineered Solutions of Georgia can do for you. You've got water now where it's not really supposed to be because of whatever else kind of happened there that's kind of brought that into your garage, crawl space, whatever else. The events of the last few days can certainly bring about more of that. And so if that's what you're dealing with, it is time to get acquainted with Engineered Solutions of Georgia, because the word solution is right there in their name. They are a problem-solving company. And if you've got cracks in your walls, maybe a sign of a foundation issue, or water creeping in where it's not supposed to be, or wet spots that kind of show you that water did creep in at some point in time where it's not supposed to be, that smell, that sort of, what is it, musty smell. Listen, you know that's not a good thing. It kind of affects your breathing and all that kind of stuff. Well, that is where our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia want to do great work for you, because you're talking about the structural integrity of your home. That's the kind of thing I have no idea how to fix that or what's appropriate. But the folks at ESOG do, because they have an entire team of engineers on staff to help you. There's nobody else in our market that can say they have that kind of resources devoted to your problem the way that our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia do. But they can provide that for you. So it is time for you to give them a call. Reach out, 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now. That will get you in touch with our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. They're proud partners of UGA. It's fun to do business with those that support the Dogs. Engineered Solutions of Georgia does. And they have been longtime friends of ours here at DawgNation there as well. Big sponsor of ours here at DawgNation Daily. So genuinely, sincerely, I thank you for your support of the great work that Engineered Solutions of Georgia does. And I can promise you, they will take great care of you. If you see those cracks in your walls, or if you see that water creeping in, foundation waterproofing issues, you can trust Engineered Solutions of Georgia to help you out with all of that. All right, so we're going to talk to Connor Riley here in a moment. And when we talk to Connor, one of the things we're going to discuss with him is what is ongoing in downtown Atlanta right now as Georgia defensive players and defensive coaches are discussing the matchup coming up against Ohio State. So we'll kind of get an in-the-moment live reaction with Connor here in a bit. We'll hear from former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm before we're done on today's show. Obviously, Jake's got the experience of having been in the college football playoff with Georgia, going back to the first time the Dogs made their appearance there in 2017. So he's a great voice to have on today's show. But before that, though, let's go around the doghouse, presented today by our friends at Georgia's Own Credit Union. And I want to hear a little bit more from some of the stuff that Kirby Smart said as Georgia arrived in Atlanta yesterday. Ohio State came in on Sunday. Georgia coming in on Monday. This is where like the home field advantage thing kind of benefits you a little bit. Is Georgia was able to squeeze in one more practice in Athens, which Kirby would just prefer. Squeeze in one more practice in Athens before coming over to Atlanta yesterday. So Buckeyes got here Sunday. Georgia got here, yesterday afternoon. And Kirby was talking about some of the issues, as it relates to the opponent, but also just kind of the bowl environment there as well. I told you a moment ago that because so much of this kind of happens out in the open, you're going to College Football Hall of Fame, you're doing these kinds of things, you got cameras following you everywhere you go. This is a little bit less private, a little bit less behind closed doors than Georgia typically would like for things to be. And for such a business, serious-oriented program like Georgia, there is an element of the bowl game that can't be just a business trip. There are some other stuff kind of baked into all this there as well. And what does that mean for a team like Georgia? Well, Kirby Smart answered some of that yesterday. Let's hear Kirby on that topic right now.
Well, I think it's part of the bowl process, and this the merger is unique between CFP, the playoff games, and the bowl games, because the bowl games have their traditions, have their beliefs, have their sponsors, and those traditions are very important to the bowls. I mean, any of the playoff games that you can play in, even with them rotating, they have bowl traditions. I went to those bowl games as a coach or a player a long time ago, and they started those traditions. So their traditions are important to them. The playoff and the meaning of the game is important to them too, but you have to balance the two. You got to make sure your players understand this is my off time, and they have activities that are scheduled, but we also are here for a purpose, and it's a business trip. It's not just a joy trip, and the balance of those two is important. So I look forward to the activities. We had them last year at the Orange Bowl. It's important to get your mind off of the game at times, and those activities allow you to do that.
So I have to admit, I find all this to be really fascinating because I'm kind of, in some respects, kind of an old school guy. And I do like the fact that the traditional bowl stuff, the teams getting together to kind of share the meal and have like the contests and all this kind of stuff that goes on. There's a part of me that likes this still goes on because it is so different than so much of the rest of the college football calendar where everything is so hard driving. Even the players themselves kind of get into their routine. They almost kind of prefer to stay into that. The fact that they do kind of find a way during bowl week to let their hair down a little bit and be a little more relaxed and kind of find a way to mix in some fun with the rest of the stuff. If you get to the national championship game, there is none of this. The national championship game is not a traditional bowl. It's a completely separate entity, so there aren't the kind of shared meals and the kind of made-for-TV public appearances, the Chamber of Commerce type of stuff. By the time you get to the national championship, you don't have any of that. But you do have that Peach Bowl, Fiesta Bowl, Rose Bowl, last year being the Orange Bowl. You do have some of that with that. And so it's really interesting to watch a team like Georgia, who is so serious so much of the time, kind of navigate that. But there's also a part of me that's sort of glad the players kind of get something out of this, the chance to have some fun and just kind of be a little more relaxed and kind of hopefully make some memories they can take with them. I do sort of like it sort of stays that way, even if the whole thing just feels very different than what the rest of the college football calendar sort of feels like. Also, more from Kirby yesterday. I talked on our show yesterday about if we assume that the odds makers are correct here, and odds makers sometimes are right, sometimes they're wrong. Obviously, they're wrong too much. They wouldn't be odds makers anymore, so they have to have a pretty good betting average. So let's just say for the sake of conversation, the odds makers are right, and Georgia's heading for a one-touchdown victory, the kind of thing that feels close and narrow, the kind of game in which a mistake could be magnified, the opportunity to make a big play could greatly ensure your chances of winning. What we said on yesterday's show was, in a game like that, your trusted, proven playmakers, the guys who've done these sort of big things for you before, those are guys that you might have to lean on more heavily in a game like this, that Georgia just hasn't played a lot of close games in recent years. And the idea of a close game is so much different than the idea of a blowout where you just kind of lean on a team, your margin, the fact that you're better across the board, your depth, the fact that you've got all that going for you is the kind of thing that just sort of overwhelms your opponent. But if you kind of find an opponent that's not overwhelmed, if you kind of find an opponent that creates sort of a fair fight where it's, I don't want to say necessarily even, but it's certainly a fair enough fight where both teams are able to throw their blows and take some punches. If you've got that situation, then who are the guys that can step up and make a big play for you when it really matters? Well, in one of the only close games Georgia's played the last couple of years, you think back to Christopher Smith in the game against Clemson going back to start the 2021 season. Pick six, interception for a touchdown. That was the difference in that ball game. And if Georgia is once again in a close game again on Saturday, this is one of the guys you may have to lean on, you may have to trust. And Kirby Smart talked about the value, what Chris Smith brings to the table when he met with reporters yesterday. Here's Kirby again.
Yeah, really proud of Chris and his growth. He came in as a really astute, tough, competitive, fiery, just competitor. And he's grown into this incredible leader, I think through his passion and his competitiveness. He hates losing at anything. He dislikes underperforming, and he's one of those guys when you give stats in practice, he calls you out if he thinks they're wrong. So he's really prideful about things. But he's a product of our development, and he came in and has really blossomed into a really good safety prospect at the next level. And just proud of the work he's done. I mean, he's a great example of if you stick around and grow in this system, you can be really good. And a lot of his buddies and friends left and moved on, and he stuck around, and it's proven to be worth it, just like Devontae and Jordan did.
I'll be really candid here for a moment. I consider myself as big a fan of Christopher Smith as almost anybody could be. I got to know Chris a little bit when he was a recruit, and so therefore I've always been a fan of his. And yet, even as a fan of Chris Smith, I sort of feel like I have discounted him over and over and over again. And, it's one of those things where if you're Smith, Kirby talks about his competitive fire and how that kind of, propels him. And he also obviously, rightly so, talks about the way in which Georgia's developed him. And all that's really true. And yet, at different points in time, I think I've just sort of discounted what Smith would be able to do in college. I mean, he's not the biggest guy. We would admit that. And when he came at Georgia, I don't know that I had him penciled in as a future starter. And I say that as somebody who really liked Smith and was really glad he was coming to UGA. But it's not like I was looking at Smith saying, man, this guy's going to be the one day he's going to be the linchpin of the defense that's going to go in and win a national championship. He's going to be the cornerstone of all that. I'm not quite so sure I would have said it that way. And yet, even as somebody who really likes Smith, I'm as guilty as anybody of of completely and totally discounting him. And lo and behold, I go back and do the same thing again because, as Kirby said, a lot of the guys that Chris was running with last year, they're all gone. And so when you looked in the absence of those guys, well, who can be the version of what those guys were, whether it be position different, whatever else, who can be the face of a defense, the avatar for a defense, the same way that those 5 first-round picks and Kobe Dean were a year ago. And once again, I don't know that I fully appreciated how effective Chris Smith would be at becoming the 2022 version of what those guys provided in 2021. I just don't know that I fully understood just how special a player he had a chance to be. And I'm a fan of his, and even I discounted him. Imagine how much others have discounted him over the course of time there as well, because every step of the way, beginning of 2021, all throughout 2022, every step of the way, he has proven himself to be quite the important piece for Georgia. And it is an example of how well Georgia has developed its talent. And frankly, on a day like this, Georgia's going to need him because he's had a penchant for making big plays before. Obviously, the SEC Championship is an example of that there too. When he picked up the football and ran it back for a touchdown. He just sort of seems to be in the right place at the right time, and he kind of seems to know what to do when the spotlight is on him. And I truly believe that Georgia's going to need him on Saturday. So good stuff there from Kirby on that. And another chance for Chris Smith to remind the world of just how important and how successful a football career he really is in the midst of having. Also, a couple other logistical issues going to deal with here for a moment. The fact that Georgia has the benefit of playing this game in Atlanta, Mercedes-Benz Stadium. How valuable is that for Georgia? When Kirby Smart explains that, he kind of talks more about some of the more process-oriented things, as I said, logistics-minded things. This is Kirby on the value of being back at Mercedes-Benz Stadium for the third time here this year. Here's Kirby.
Probably that where the scoreboard, the clocks, and all the different stuff is the biggest thing. The field's the same. There's not a lot of difference in terms of the diameter and the width of the field, but I think it's more about familiarity of the quarterback knowing the shot clock and the ribbons and the different things. The biggest difference is, both teams will get to practice in there, so they'll be familiar with it by the time the game starts.
I do think that's true, and when we see, you'll see some practice video coming out this week. You'll see this practice taking place at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. It's interesting to note that when Georgia was here for the national championship in 2017, once again, not being a bowl week, you have a little bit more freedom. Georgia went back to Athens to practice back then, but obviously because of the bowl week and because of the responsibilities you have to have this week, they're going to stay in Atlanta and have those practices right there. And I would say there's obviously more to being in Atlanta than just knowing where the scoreboard is, although I don't necessarily discount that kind of stuff as mattering. John Stinchcomb talked to us yesterday, but the fact that he thinks, there really is a little bit of a comfort factor that is raised when you're back in the place for the third time this year. I mean, Kyrus Jackson said yesterday he's played in the SEC Championship 4 times. I mean, these guys, one of our video commenters said, if you look at the sort of fifth-year seniors for Georgia, they played, I think he said 8 times already at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. This is a venue that Georgia is very, very comfortable in, and I would say it goes beyond just some of the stuff that Kirby said there. It's not enough to necessarily guarantee victory in the game, but pretty clearly you would much rather be doing this than traveling way out to Arizona, a long way from home, in a stadium you haven't played in. Pretty clearly there is something to be said that Georgia gains from being here, especially knowing that Ohio State really kind of hasn't been in that spot before. And then one more from Kirby. Speaking of the Buckeyes, as we said, and this is one of those things that admittedly makes me just a little nervous here, that Ohio State is in the position that Georgia was in last year, coming into the game off a loss with the entire world asking tough questions about him and saying bad things about him. Doubters to be silenced. Last year, Georgia was able to do that. Is Ohio State going to be able to do that this year coming off the Michigan loss? Kirby Smart talked about the potential value of the extra motivation that comes from having to circle the wagons and regroup after losing a game like the way the Buckeyes did to the Wolverines. This is also Kirby from that on yesterday.
Yeah, it recentered things. I think you recalibrate and you look back, and sometimes the reality of your weaknesses pop up a lot more in a loss. We like to say, why do you got to lose to learn? You shouldn't have to do that, but it certainly is a wake-up call on teams I've been with that it recentered everybody and refocused everybody. But obviously we've tried to do that without that, and sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. It's just one of those things.
I'm not sure how much better you really do play off a loss. Maybe you do. I think there's some reasons to understand why you would. But what I think is actually probably more true is that the perception of the team playing so much better off of a loss is probably heightened, because I do think the biggest thing that happens to you after lose a game is you are just excessively undervalued. Georgia was coming off the Alabama game a year ago. Ohio State, I believe, is coming off the Michigan game here right now. To me, it's not so much that the loss is a great springboard for you, as it is that the loss clouds the judgment of fans who've been watching teams play all year long, or media types who've been watching the teams play all year long. But recency bias is just a very real thing. And right now, the recency bias that you would kind of view Ohio State through would say, hey, they're not very good because they just lost to Michigan. To take nothing into account of the 12 games they won prior to that and the many, many games of the program they've been winning here during the college football playoff era. So I don't know that any of this necessarily points to the direction this game is going, and obviously all of this opens the door for not just analysis but over-analysis. We'll probably be guilty of doing some of that ourselves here this week, but there's plenty of storylines. Georgia playing in its home state. Ohio State playing with revenge on its mind after being embarrassed against their hated rival. In a lot of different ways, it's going to chop all this up. And between now and kickoff on Saturday night, you better believe we'll do each and everything we can to certainly get into every one of those storylines. But for now, we'll say that's Around the Doghouse, presented by Georgia's own credit union. And, of course, this time of year, you're traveling, you're buying gifts, you're doing all those great things. And let me tell you this, the stuff that you're already doing, that experience can be made more enjoyable when you make those purchases using one of the Visa, Signature, and Platinum cards that our friends at Georgia's own credit union are all about. Because when you use one of these cards, you're going to get some great benefits just for using the card, just for doing that stuff. I'm talking about some flex rewards that can be used for just about anything, like gift cards or cash back or travel, merchandise. You can also earn up to $150 just for opening a new Platinum or Signature card. Now, there are some restrictions that apply on this, so make sure you check out georgiasown.org for more details. That's georgiasown.org for more details on that. All right, we are going to hear from former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm before we're done. We'll talk to him about a lot of different things as it relates to this matchup. But for now, on what just happened, as I've been speaking, Georgia coaches and players have been talking too. So the latest from downtown Atlanta, right ahead of the Peach Bowl on Saturday. Let's talk to Connor Riley about all of that right now on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We'll bring in Connor Riley here in downtown Atlanta, setting the stage for what's going on. Ohio State offensive coordinator Kevin Wilson, some Buckeyes players this morning. A couple of minutes ago, Georgia defensive coordinator, I don't know if it was Will Muschamp, I'm assuming maybe it was, and some Georgia players. Connor, what have you heard from the Dogs so far here today?
Yeah, no, we got the chance to talk to both Will Muschamp and Glenn Schumann today, Chris Smith, Jamon Dumas-Johnson, a bunch of key names and faces for this team. They're excited. I think maybe the LSU game is, I think, very clearly being overblown a good bit by what we saw in that game. I know a lot of people bring up the 502 yards, 30 points, et cetera, et cetera. You can kind of tell Georgia's ready to put that behind them. You've heard a lot of talk about just getting back to the fundamentals. I mean, the reality is that game was 35-7 at one point, and I think Georgia very clearly changed up the way that they were playing to, sort of just get out of there without any further injuries, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So naturally, a lot being made of that. We heard from Ohio State players as well. I think similarly, they're ready to stop talking about the Michigan game. It was over a month ago, and they're ready to put their best forward and go out there and show what they can do against a very physical Georgia team.
Yeah, whether you kind of buy into like the whole idea of rat poison, I think you and I both have said we're sort of tired of that as a talking point. But there is probably a notion for some Georgia fans, however you want to describe it, that the idea that Georgia having to answer tough questions about a bad defensive game against LSU probably makes them feel more comfortable, because if it wasn't for that, everything would be about how Ohio State's not, good enough to be here because they lost to Michigan. Georgia's the next Alabama because that's what ESPN.com is writing. That there's probably a little bit of a level of comfort for some Georgia fans that there are actually some tough questions being asked of UGA. The fact that Georgia is being treated as if it has something to prove, because it sort of seems like the prevailing narrative beyond that is how great Georgia is, and how, frankly, Ohio State, seems the opposite based on what went down against Michigan.
Do you think that this team is not going to be seen as great if they do lose to Ohio State? Do you think that would change anything?
I think it makes them – let me be careful how I say this. I think if Georgia were to win the national championship last year, go to the playoff, and lose – it makes them just another national champion. There is nothing wrong with being just another national champion, but what you have available to you is a level of history that puts you on such a high shelf. It may be a long time before anybody gets there. So It doesn't make you bad if you lose. It just makes you common. Whereas if you win and you go there, you are extraordinarily rare. That this is one of those things where you're not playing to avoid pain. You're playing to sort of seek a level of pleasure that most players will never get the chance to enjoy. That's what this is really about. Are you just like most national champions? Because, Connor, since 2014, most national champs in this era have made the playoff the following year. Georgia's actually kind of following in the footsteps of doing that. But to now win it for a second year, then all of a sudden you're talking about a true empire, dynasty, however you want to describe it. You're talking about something that's just a little bit more rare than that.
Right, but I think that's maybe more of a reflection of the Georgia program as a whole and not just the accomplishments of this 2022 team. And I think what we've seen from this team so far, I do think they're unquestionably great. And sure, they may not have, the draft prospects and star power, but I mean, they had a Heisman Trophy finalist in Stetson Bennett, who, again, his story is well told at this point. It'll be well told once again this week. You've got Chris Smith, a guy who I think a lot of Georgia fans thought was a good player coming in this year. No one had him as a unanimous All-American first-team safety, and that's sort of who he's become. And so, I understand, people out there wanting to use the stupidest term in media, rat poison, and say, don't talk about how great Georgia is. I mean, the reality is this team is 13-0 against an SEC schedule and went out there and beat all but one team by double digits. They've earned the right to be here, and this idea that they have to sit there and hear about the one shortcoming they had in the half where they were up by 4 touchdowns, I just think that's a little unfair to what these guys have done, and to frame it in that sort of juxtaposition. There are other ways to talk about this team without just focusing on one half of a game that they were up by 3 touchdowns.
No, I think that's fair. And you mentioned Christopher Smith, and I said this before you joined us, which is that, listen, I'm a fan of Chris Smith, and even I have continually underrated him. I got to know him a little bit as a recruit. I don't know that Connor I ever necessarily had him being a multi-year starter for Georgia the way he's turned out to be, and to say nothing of the fact that he's an All-American here right now. And even coming back after last year, I don't know that I fully appreciated the fact that he would kind of take on the sort of intangible feel that so many of the great players on the 2021 roster kind of had, that Smith has kind of become a 2022 version of that. I love Chris. I've always enjoyed rooting for him, and even I have probably shortchanged him now more than once. It's really amazing the kind of player that he's become, even with people like me who'd be inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt, even with me at times showing some skepticism. It's just kind of amazing of the player that he's become, and frankly now how pivotal I view him to be going in a game like this, where if it is somewhat close as I expect it to be, playmakers are magnified, and Smith has just proven to be one of those playmakers.
Yeah, let's take into consideration, if Chris Smith were a recruit right now coming out of Hayesville Charter, Georgia's probably not recruiting him, given his size and speed measurables and what he does. And the fact that he's turned into, based on resume, the best safety of the Kirby Smart era, and that's probably the best safety in maybe the history of Georgia football, I think just speaks to what is between the ears and eyes for him. He's an incredibly talented player, obviously, doing the most with what his body can physically allow. But look, Georgia's played 2 big games in the stadium already that they'll play on Saturday. He had an interception against Oregon. He had an interception against LSU. He returned the fumble for a touchdown against LSU as well. He had an interception in the national championship game last year, had the pick 6 against Clemson. This guy's made big plays in every big game he's been in, and that's just not what defines him as well. He's great every single Saturday, and really I think if you're looking for a guy who's probably the face of this Georgia team this season, and when we take the 10,000-foot view from it, it probably is Chris Smith, a guy who, maybe not as rawly talented as a Lewis Seam, but got every little bit of drip out of the towel and into the bucket, and has made himself into a unquestionably great player. And I think this Georgia team is an unquestionably great team.
Kevin Wilson's going to leave and become Tulsa head coach when the CFP is done, but he is Ohio State offensive coordinator for right now. What did you make of the talk from the Buckeyes offense here today?
Yeah, I think they're ready to go out and show that what happened against Michigan was an aberration and not who they are. Ryan Day also does, I would point out, hold a pretty big hand in play calling and offensive structure. He's still very involved in that side of the ball. CJ Stroud, there's a lot of pressure on him in this game. There's maybe a little bit of narrative around him. He's great when things are nice, but when things break down, when he doesn't have great protection, maybe he struggles a little bit and you're able to get him off the spot. Georgia's going to try to do that. This set of receivers is really talented. Obviously, Georgia's seen good receivers throughout the course of the season, but Marvin Harrison and Ameja Ibuka, which are very talented guys. Julian Fleming was the number 1 wide receiver route consensus in the 2020 recruiting class, and he's sort of their 3rd receiver on this team. It speaks to the talent that they have in that room. And look, Georgia played really well throughout times this season, but if they don't bring their A game against this Ohio State team, I think this offense is certainly capable of making things difficult. And so guys up front like a Jalen Carter, like a Zion Lowe, a Michael Williams, they're going to need to have a strong game because I think we've seen with this Georgia defense now, while they do a lot of stuff well, getting pressure off the edge from that outside linebacker spot is just something they haven't done well since Nolan Smith went down. And when you have to face the offensive tackles that Ohio State that's not going to be all that easy either. So I think you really need to be creative in where you bring pressure from. Look for a guy like Javon Bullard to be very active as a blitzer in the pass rush. We saw that against Tennessee. I think that's something you're going to see once again against Ohio State. And then how successfully is Jalen Carter able to create havoc from the middle of that line? That's sort of how I think Georgia best goes about stopping this Ohio State offense. Creative blitzes with guys like with Javon Bullard, maybe a Jamon Dumas-Johnson, and then obviously Jalen Carter just winning those one-on-one or one-on-two matchups.
I want to squeeze in one final thing before we let you go, and then in addition to this, you can kind of tell me anything else you've seen, but we made a very big deal about a very short video a little earlier, Ladd McConkey getting off the bus, I guess yesterday when they went to the College Football Hall of Fame. Seemed to be walking okay. Kirby didn't have much to say about McConkey or McClendon yesterday. We'll obviously see a lot of this on Wednesday because practice will be open, at least a period of it will be. It's very hard to keep a lot of things secret during a traditional bowl week, and that's what this is kind of going to be this week. What do you think about the current status of McConkey, McClendon, kind of how this is going to play out over the course of the next couple of days?
Yeah, I think they're both going to start and play. I think they're both full go. And, Warren's dealing with an MCL injury, but that's been pretty common. Amarius Mims had one earlier this season. He only missed 1 week and was coming back, so I expect him to be fine. Ladd, he's been dealing with this injury sort of off and on throughout the season, and it's just sort of a pain tolerance thing. It got hit. He landed on it the wrong way against LSU, and it sort of flared it up once again in the middle of the game for the first time. And you've heard throughout the season Georgia talking about managing Ladd's workload throughout practice. I think that's sort of what Kirby was alluding to. And so they're going to try and use him the best in most ways they can. But they know, if that knee takes a funny hit or if it lands funny, if it flares up in the middle of a game again, you're probably going to see what you saw against LSU. But I expect him to start. I expect him to be the first wide receiver out there, and I expect him to be very involved in the game plan as much as Georgia will allow him to do so.
Anything else from having been in downtown the last couple of days that you want to make our audience aware of?
Yeah, I think there's a real excitement sort of building for this game. Last year, I don't think there was the same level of excitement of positivity around Georgia's game against Michigan, and I think this time there's a sort of quasi-national championship type feel to it, given these two programs and where they've been in recent years. So I think there's going to be real excitement, even from the Ohio State side. I know we've talked a little bit about how up for this game are they going to be. I think by the time Saturday rolls around, a lot of their fans will have talked themselves into it. And as long as they didn't, book a flight on a directionally named airline, I think they should be able to get down here and have an exciting game to watch on Saturday.
By the way, I'm nervous about that for LA. I hope that all gets cleared up by the time we get to Los Angeles.
Well, I mean, again, as long as you're not flying a directionally named airline, I think you should be okay. And if there's a specific Atlanta-based airline you're flying, again, I feel like we should be okay for that.
I may or may not have a flight booked on the airline in question, unfortunately.
BA.
So we'll see how that goes. Connor, good stuff. Thanks for being with us. We'll look forward to reading a bunch of your coverage throughout the week, and I'm sure we'll see you on video again before it's all said and done as well.
Yep, thanks for having me on, BA.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Of course, no putting the cart before the horse when it comes to a possible trip to Los Angeles for the national championship, but I may or may not be a little bit concerned about my travel arrangements as they stand right now. That is, though, a different conversation for a different time if you've been following the news. We're going to follow the news with Jake Fromm here coming in a moment. We'll talk to the former Georgia quarterback. There is a specific question I want to ask Jake about the Ohio State offense. We're going to do that with him coming up in a moment. Before that, though, let's go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. One of our great commenters is a guy named Scott Harris. Scott's been a part of our video stuff for a long time. He shares his thoughts, as a lot of folks do, in our live chat comment sections and across all of our video platforms. Scott was telling us a little earlier that he did, just like I did, gave the gift of a Royal Caribbean cruise here during this holiday season. He had a very clever way that he did that, kind of a puzzle you put together that revealed to his kids. They're all going on a cruise together. Perfect day Coco K picture there with that. And that's a really fun thing. I told you yesterday, we kind of revealed to my mom that me, my wife, my kids, my brother, his wife, their kids, we're all going to go with my mom on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation coming up in June. So it's always fun to see the joy that Royal Caribbean provides through fresh eyes, meaning that, hey, listen, y'all know I've been on Royal Caribbean cruise vacations. I got a couple coming up here over the course of the next few months, including one with all of you on board our DawgNation cruise. And yet when you're able to give this gift to somebody else, you see how excited they get about all the fun things that are going on with something like this. So I hope you get that experience one day yourself, to give the gift of a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation to someone, or maybe even someone will give you one, which would be a really good thing there as well. So check out RoyalDogs.com. That's a website that a great travel agent named Jessica Slater has put together, RoyalDogs.com. You can see all the information about the DawgNation cruise coming up in April. And that's going to be a fun one. April the 24th through the 28th, going to Nassau in the Bahamas, Perfect Day, Coco Cay, the private island exclusive for those on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Of course, leaving out of Port Canaveral on board Independence of the Seas. Going to be a great experience. You can also call Jessica directly, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147, and you can check out all of that today. All right, if you want to, let's bring the music down here a little bit, because we're going to kind of shift our normal content for our SEC through, and I want to actually take a moment to hear a little bit from Ohio State coach Ryan Day, who met with reporters yesterday, and obviously looking at the perspective of Georgia. Now, if you want to go to the DawgNation YouTube page, I'm sure you can see the entirety of the Ryan Day interview. We don't have time to play all of it for you here right now, but I do want to give you some of it here as we're kind of cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. We're cheating on the format here a little bit, but nonetheless, this is our best way to kind of squeeze this in, including something that Kirby Smart has talked about a lot. You know, C.J. Stroud is a player that Georgia recruited. You can look up and down Paris Johnson Jr., an offensive lineman that Georgia recruited. You can look up and down the Ohio State roster, and you'll recognize names of former recruiting targets of UGA. And for Ohio State, when they look at the Georgia roster, they see plenty of examples of that too. How about kind of those sort of cross, I guess, you know, the way in which these two programs cross paths in recruiting, the recognizable names on both sides. Ryan Day talked about that yesterday as a storyline for this game, the fact they have battled in recruiting so much, and now they'll be battling on the field. Here's Day on that topic.
Well, it's a small world. Football is a small world. You know, now even more than ever, you know, you end up recruiting guys, and then you end up you know, having played against them, or even have them come back in you know, the transfer portal. You know, there's just there's only so many players out there, and there's only so many people typically that fit your profile too. And so, you know, we run in small circles, and we know a lot of the people who play at Georgia. We know their families, but that's similar to a lot of the teams we play. And you know, now with travel and the way that recruiting goes, you know, you're in touch with a lot of people, you recruit a lot of people, and they've done an excellent job of recruiting, and they have a lot of really good football players on that side of the ball, or on in all three phases. You know, at Georgia, and Kirby's done a good job of recruiting. So we know those guys. We know how talented they are, and obviously how well they're coached. So we know the challenge ahead of us. But to your question, you know, we're kind of used to playing against guys that we know about and that we've recruited against.
I understand why Ryan Day is saying what he says there. You just sort of say whatever you need to get through a press conference. I get that. But the final statement he makes there really isn't true. The idea that, oh, yeah, we play against players all the time that we've recruited. Now, in some form or fashion, that's kind of true. But the idea that there's so many Ohio State-level recruits on the other side of the field, frankly, that's not something that Ohio State's used to. Playing a team that has so many different players that would have been good enough to earn a scholarship from that program. And conversely, the same thing is true about Georgia as well. For the most part, Georgia goes through an entire season without really playing too many teams that have too many players who are good enough to play at UGA. That's why Georgia wins blowout games. That's why Ohio State wins a lot of blowout games, because for the most part, they overwhelm their opponents with their talent advantage. And yet in this game, even though we would say that Georgia is favored for a reason, justifiably probably the better team on paper, it is still not an overwhelming talent advantage if you use recruiting rankings and things like that as the basis for your opinion that this is, between these two teams, kind of a fair fight. And you don't see a lot of fair fights in college football, but this is certainly one of those, and that's what makes the feel of this game a little bit different than almost any other potential CFP matchup you could have. Georgia-Ohio State just had a little bit different feel to it because of that. And then to go a little bit deeper into the subject of Georgia, no pun intended, on the idea of all that recruiting success, the kind of depth that creates for Georgia at a number of position groups. Once again, Ryan Day, pretty complimentary of the Dogs. Here is Day again.
Yeah, well, they've done a great job recruiting and have depth at so many positions. And so I know one of their, something they take a lot of pride in is playing a lot of depth, in offense and defense. You know, I think, like you said, there's guys who roll in the front. There's guys who roll in the back end. multiple running backs, multiple wide receivers. That's when you're playing against a really good team who plays with a lot of depth and is recruited really well. That's one of the things you have to prepare for. And what does that mean? Well, you just have to know that you're not going to just hone in on one or two guys. You got to be aware of more than one of those guys, and that's a sign of a good team.
So obviously Ryan Day sees a lot to like when he looks at the Georgia Bulldogs, and I'm sure Kirby Smart feels the same way when he looks at Ohio State. The feeling I have about this game really has not changed very much from where I was when this game was first announced, because of the fact that the two programs have such a similar feel, and the fact that Ohio State stacks depth. Now, they do a lot of it at the wide receiver spot and quarterback spot and things like that. Georgia has kind of stacked its depth in slightly a different way, but the overall feel of these big macro programs who are always seemingly adjacent to each other in the on-field rankings, AP poll, CFP poll, coaches poll, always adjacent seemingly to each other in the recruiting rankings. One team's number one team's number two. They're almost always in the top three. Something along those lines there on that. Because of that, it just makes the game on the field between these two teams just feel so significant. The fact that that these two big, powerful programs are about to battle head-to-head. And obviously both coaches find a lot to compliment each other on. So interesting to hear that as we're cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. At least a version of that, hearing from Ohio State coach Ryan Day right there. Now here on DawgNation Daily, want to get ready to do our Kroger Fresh Take and talk to the former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm here for a moment. Jake, thanks for being a part of the show. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas to you. Hope you've enjoyed it. And we're happy to talk a little bit of football with you here right now.
Hey, Brian, what's going on? Thank you for having me. Merry Christmas. Glad to be here. Yeah, man, let's have some fun.
So I want to ask you a question. And listen, obviously you're not watching Ohio State game film all the time. I totally understand. They don't have time to. You're busy getting ready for your own, football career there with the Washington Commanders. But I am curious, as a quarterback, something you may have noticed. Yesterday, we kind of had the conversation around here of, hey, when Georgia faced a high-powered offense this year in Tennessee, Georgia shut it down really well. And yet with Ohio State, it's kind of a similar type of situation. Really good quarterback in C.J. Stroud, very good wide receivers. And yet schematically, we're kind of led to believe that these two teams are a little bit different. So to the extent that you've had a chance to kind of observe Tennessee or observe Ohio State, like what do you see as kind of similarities and differences between these two teams? And how much confidence do you think a Georgia fan should take from the fact that, hey, Georgia handled Tennessee pretty well a little earlier, and now it's trying to do the same thing against Ohio State? What is similar, what is different about these two teams in your mind?
To me, I think there's a lot more similarities than there are differences. Both quarterbacks playing really well, are really good football players, and they have skill position rooms that can compete with anybody, if not better than anybody in the country. So I think they're a lot more alike than they are different. I think the plan that Kirby and the defense had going into the Tennessee game, not only did they have a great plan, but they executed on that plan too. And so that's what it's going to take for the guys to be successful coming up here. They're going to put together a very similar plan, but Ohio State knows that as well. So they're going to have a few different wrinkles involved. But, man, it's just about executing on the plan. They have a little bit of a sour taste in their mouth after that LSU game where they gave up more points than I know they wanted to. So they're going to be looking to come out and be aggressive.
I am not an X's and O's expert. I don't pretend to be. I had somebody that's smart, though, yesterday tell me something that if you look at Ohio State compared to Tennessee, with Tennessee, it seems like their big operating principle is they just want to play so fast that they are lining up and snapping the ball before you have a chance to get lined up, and that's kind of how they exploit you. And yet on Ohio State's side is they do far more pre-snap motion. It's almost like Tennessee doesn't have time for pre-snap motion because they're trying to snap the ball as quick as they possibly can. Yep. But for a team like Ohio State, they do want to play that game pre-snap, which what somebody told me was that's going to put way more pressure on your coverage guys, safeties, nickelback, corners, to obviously, be in the right spot and be, really kind of short up because Ohio State's trying to move around before the snap to kind of get you in a position that you're not comfortable with. If you've kind of seen some version of that, would you mind talking a little bit more about that?
Yeah, just basic schematics here. It's a lot of eye candy that the offense is trying to give the defense. It makes the coaches coach harder during the week, more possibilities within their scheme where they have to account for this and for that, a T motion's here, and then there's a quick or a fast or a jet motion this way. So there's a lot more of coaching involved during the week to allow for all these different possibilities. And then what you do is you get some a safety, a DB, a corner, or a linebacker who loses his eye discipline, gets in the wrong gap, looking at the wrong receiver, and then all of a sudden, boom, they use their speed to exploit you, and then all of a sudden you just gave up a big one because mentally and with your eyes you were out of place before the play even started. So that's what they're going to try to do. And then just going to have to be able to kind of coach around that during the week and then make adjustments on game day.
Kirby Smart talked yesterday about the familiarity with the play clock and the scoreboard, things like that, because Georgia's played here before. Obviously, Ohio State now gets a chance to practice here. As a quarterback, how much for you, when you kind of enter into a stadium for the first time, are you looking around at things like that? I can tell you as like a media person, I'm always trying to figure out where like the down and distance is and like where like the play clock is and stuff like that, because every stadium does kind of configure that kind of stuff differently with these sort of fancy boards they all have now. As a quarterback yourself, how much were you kind of looking around and trying to figure out, hey, where's my field of vision going to be when I'm playing here in a stadium like this? As a quarterback yourself, how much does that matter?
100%. That's one of the first things you do when you walk out. To walk around the field. I believe they do like a walkthrough the day before. So it's one of the first things you look at. Hey, where's the play clock? Hey, where's the scoreboard? Where's the game clock? And man, you just checking off your boxes, your list that you have, things you got to get familiar with. Obviously, with the familiarity there that Dogs have of playing there, with Stetson playing there, he's got success there. So that is something that can kind of be breezed by, and then you could be focusing on some other things that may be a slightly little bit more important. But yeah, I think that plays a huge factor to the game, especially for a quarterback.
I know you're a baseball player. There's the idea of the batter's eye, and you want to be able to see that pitch coming out of the pitcher's hand. In basketball, I don't know if you're much of a college basketball fan, but for a long time there was this thought of teams don't shoot as well in dome stadiums because it's a very different backdrop when you look at the goal than you typically see other places. Some of that's probably overblown, but that's kind of one of the things that college basketball players have said for a long time. How about as a quarterback, when you see a stadium that kind of they sort of have a glass end on one side of Mercedes-Benz Stadium, is there a difference in kind of the backdrop of what the stadium looks like in terms of how easily you see the receivers and how easily you see the oncoming defensive players? Is there something to how visually a stadium can kind of change the way that you see the action there on the field as a quarterback?
Yeah, so I think you had some great examples there. I think with the glass backdrop, I think, in my opinion, that's reaching just a little bit. However, take Kentucky, for example. When you play there and on the road, everything's blue. When they wear their blue jerseys, everything's blue. So, and in their end zone, they have it painted blue. So when you're doing kind of some red zone stuff, all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, where'd that safety go? I don't know where he's at because everything's blue. Now there's some something like that. And then maybe we can kind of talk about and get into an argument about maybe a crown of the field. Some fields are crowned more than others, throwing deep go balls and nines and that kind of thing. But I think the guys, they've played there a bunch. They know what it's about. Now, that turf and that surface, that turf's going to play faster, which is why you see a lot of points being scored in that stadium because it's a little bit of a faster turf.
One final question for you coming up. Before that, let me remind folks, is our Kroger Fresh Take with former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm here on DawgNation Daily. And, of course, we appreciate our friends at Kroger for the stuff they have going for us all year long, including as we head towards the new year. How about the fun with Kroger Chef Jr. Coming up once again? That's a great guided kids cooking experience that you can enjoy with your children. It kind of gets them acquainted with how food is prepared, but it also gets them tasting some good and healthy foods for them. And in 2023, some great opportunities for you to do that. You can go to KrogerChefJr.com to find out more about this. It's the word junior spelled out Junior. Kroger Chef Jr. to find out more about this, including coming up on January 7th and the 21st here this month. How about a dumpling sandwich? That sounds really good. The experience is a 30-minute guided kids cooking experience. They make the food item. They also come away with some really good stuff like an apron patch, a chef's hat, a recipe card and box, and the dumpling maker. It's just $7 per child. So go to KrogerChefJr.com for more on that. That is KrogerChefJr.com for more on that today. All right, Jake, we'll finish with this. This is the last time you and I will talk before this big game on Saturday. How do you feel about the Dogs' chances to come away with the win?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel really good about it. I feel like it's going to be very similar to the Tennessee game. It's going to be a lot like a home field environment for the guys. I know the fans will be there, so it'll be loud, kind of get Ohio State maybe not quite as comfortable as they should be on a neutral site field. And I think Kirby's going to put together a great plan. The offense is obviously rolling there in the last game. I think they will continue with that momentum, with that success. And so for me, I think it's going to be very similar to the outcome of the score of the Tennessee game. I think it being around 30-ish points. I think Ohio State gets anywhere between 13, maybe 17 points. So let's go 34-17. I like it.
I like it, Jake. That's good stuff. Thank you so much. Happy holidays. Happy New Year to you. And we'll look forward to talking to you again here very soon.
Hey, Brandon. Thank you, guys. Go Dogs.
Good stuff there. Jake Fromm, a part of our Kroger Fresh Take with the former Georgia quarterback, 34-17, his pick for how this game's going to play out. So that is really good stuff. And interesting to hear his thoughts on, because I do think some of this is sort of a logistics issue, right, about how the stadium feels, how it looks, your comfort in that. Jake saying, hey, when I'm going into a stadium, that's the first thing I'm trying to figure out. And as a quarterback, you understand why that's the case. But also some of that breakdown with what you see offensively from Ohio State, Tennessee. Interesting to hear Jake say, even though schematically they may be a good bit different, that from Jake's perspective, it's probably more similar than not. Pretty good breakdown there from him on that there, too. So for our golden shoe today, we're going to do things a little bit different here. Obviously, we are go for 2 in 22 like always. But when we get a chance to kind of show you some of the sights and sounds from Bowl Week, we want to do that here a little bit too. So for those of you on video, we will show you here a little bit of Georgia making that appearance yesterday at the College Football Hall of Fame. And if you're listening radio podcast, I'll try to describe this to you a little bit. So they're walking in there. I told you before, I love the playoff like track suits, windsuits, whatever you want to call them, they wear this time of year because they got this, the special Peach Bowl logo on there that looks good. I don't see the diamond Nike swoosh like I like, but nonetheless, that's good stuff. Being greeted by the Peach Bowl mascot, not quite sure what sort of creature that's supposed to be, but nonetheless, that's pretty fun. And then just getting a chance to walk around the College Football Hall of Fame, something these guys may not have gotten a chance to do before. There's obviously plenty of Georgia paraphernalia on hands there, and they're clearly enjoying a lot of that. By the way, you see Gunnar Stockton walking right there in the center of your screen. So a lot of Georgia players having a good time and enjoying themselves there with the college football playoff and enjoying the College Football Hall of Fame. So great stuff. Golden shoe to be had there on that. Now, let me tell you who's not walking around the College Football Hall of Fame, and let me tell you who's not basking in the glory of a wonderful season right now. That is those lousy, stinking Gators. And they got more bad news coming their way. 305 days from right now. 305 is the area code down in South Florida, and whatever Gators fans live down there around Miami, guess what? They know there's bad news coming here. In Jacksonville, up in the north part of the state, 305 days from right now. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. Y'all, we're going to be on live video this afternoon around 2 p.m. We're going to do a Go for 2 in 22 special, kind of updating you on the ongoing preparations for the Peach Bowl. So we'll do that this afternoon, and we'll see you tomorrow, just like always, for DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that. So we're going to take your comments. Said before, we'll be live back on video later on this afternoon. So everybody would be surprised again. Like, what are they doing? The last time we did one of these Go for 2 in 22 specials, people were a little bit surprised to see us. So I'm sure we'll get the same level of surprise later on today. But I want to give you more from the stuff in Atlanta. There's just a lot going on. I want to give you video of Georgia having fun, very, very serious football conversation, too, with what the coaches and players are saying. So we're going to try to do all of that here, and so looking forward to that. So be a part of that with us here coming up in just a little bit. For now, though, how about your comments? I'll go to Facebook first and get some comments over there, and then we'll sort of find out what everybody else has going on there, too. Let's see. On Facebook for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Let's see. So I never understand why this happens. Sometimes messages get hidden, but none of us are hiding them, so I don't know why. Ryan Walker has got a great takedown of Archie Griffin, the back-to-back Heisman Trophy winner. I don't know if the big tech overlords are Buckeyes fans or what, but they have shadow banned Ryan Walker's comment. Is that what there is? Is there an Ohio State troll in the building here? Well, there you go. But Ryan Walker's got a great takedown of Archie Griffin, but it appears to have been hidden. I don't know what that is. So sorry, Ryan, you've been shadow banned by big tech. Let's see what else is going on. Yeah, so Gary Hackworth is in here stirring up trouble. We don't usually get a ton of trolls on Facebook. For whatever reason, they all go to YouTube. I don't usually get a ton of trolls on Facebook, but there you go. Matt Rukavina says ESPN was hyping up the Ohio State passing game versus our secondary last night during the bowl coverage for sure. So there you go. The Ohio State passing attack getting some love. Miriam Corbin says, looking forward to seeing you at the Peach Bowl. Miriam, hope to see you there as well. The one place I know we will be is, even though we're not doing an official tailgate, we're going to try to be in that sort of Home Depot backyard area to see the dog walk. There's going to be a dog walk. You know, a lot of times for like these bowl games, the NFL stadiums, the buses just sort of drive straight into the stadium. They don't have to like step outside. And in Indianapolis, you better believe that was a good thing for those players because they didn't have to experience that super cold. But for the Peach Bowl, there's going to be a ceremonial walk through the fans the same way they did prior to the season for the Oregon game. So we're going to be out there covering that. So that's the one place I know we will be. Let's see what else. Mike Mazzell, appreciate you being here. Alex Lundeen going to be at a casino watching the game. That means he's going to be putting his money down to cash in on the Dogs. And like here, listen, I don't really entertain the troll stuff too much, but here's like the one thing I'd say to Gary or any other Ohio State fan. Listen, we've said here on the show, of course, the last few days, there's obviously some reasons to respect Ohio State and some reasons to view them as a worthy challenger here, a formidable foe. You know, we're not going to pretend we haven't, shown some respect towards the Buckeyes. But this idea that you would come in just sort of like beaming with confidence a year after the team that humiliated you got humiliated by Georgia, I mean, that just doesn't make any logical sense. So, listen, could Ohio State beat Georgia? Obviously that's the case. But is whatever kind of face you're putting on right now, is that authentic and genuine? We would say probably not, because deep down you know that you haven't looked good against Michigan the last 2 years. And last year, if Michigan could have tapped out and walked off the field against Georgia, they definitely would have. And so clearly you know that's true, and clearly that's in the back of your mind here on all of this, is that the team that Ohio State has been left lacking against did not want any against Georgia. So clearly Ohio State comes into this game with much more to prove than Georgia does. Now, the motivation to win and be a part of history is obviously driving UGA, but the burden of proof in a game like this rests on the side of Ohio State. And deep down, you know that's true. Let's see what else. Daryl Fleming says, love this time of year when the Dogs in the playoff. # go for 2 in 22. Yeah, I mean, I can tell you this. I love the college football playoff. I always have. I know not everybody does, and I can understand why you don't. There are some people who sort of feel like that this is frustrating. It's worse than the BCS. The expansion's not good. Like, I get all of that, but I've always loved the playoff. A lot of you know this. I love the playoff debates. Like, we do playoff ranking shows. Like, my bosses don't make us do those. They don't care if we do those or not. We just do them because I like to do them. I like to debate the playoff rankings. I just think it's really fun. I just think it's kind of a fun thing to do. So 2014, 2015, 2016, 3 years of college football playoff talk. Georgia wasn't really anywhere to be found in any of those years in terms of actually being in the playoff. Wasn't even a discussion. And so here's this great event that I loved, and Georgia wasn't a part of it. When Georgia broke through and made the playoff in 2017, I was so happy. And listen, as a sports fan, looking how the Rose Bowl turned out and all of that, if that was as happy as I ever ended up being, then that was going to be really, really a great happy thing. And so to think now, since then, not only have we seen Georgia win the national championship, we've seen Georgia now back in the playoff for a third time. And I know this seems weird, and maybe some people are like, well, you're not, setting your standard high enough or whatever else. Honestly, as a sports fan, I don't think I really measure myself in how many championships did so-and-so team win. That's not really the way I think about this. I think about this more along the lines of how many years was my team in the mix? This is a week to be relevant. This is a week in which ESPN is writing a story, this long about you, or, whatever, longer than that maybe even. This is one of those things where the eyes of the college football world are on your team, and it just sort of feels different when that's true. Think about the extra coverage you'll get of Georgia. The college football playoff just feels really big, and I hope that Georgia wins it. But let's say for whatever reason they don't win it all this year, it won't make me say, well, I just wish they hadn't been in playoff at all. No, that's not the way that I feel. I love being in the playoff. I love being on this stage. It's just really fun, and I'm glad to see you enjoying it too. Let's see what else. Sandy Price says it's all about who wants it the most. Yeah, there is sort of a level of motivation you have to sort of dig deep and you find. Because in a game that's close, and I do expect this game to be close. I expect this game to be closer than some of y'all think it's going to be. In a game in which the margin is thin, 1% difference here and there matters. Just one tiny percent difference can make a big, big difference in terms of how the game is decided. And, that is where that sort of extra level of motivation. And I think most of us would say, hey, the most significant motivation we ever face is avoiding some sort of pain. For instance, if you've ever lost weight, like in my life, my weight kind of goes up and down from time to time. And it's like when you're kind of heavier than you want to be, but you're not really making the changes you need to make. It's because the thought is, well, the pain of getting involved in an exercise routine or saying no to foods that I'm currently saying yes to, the pain of making that change just seems too great. But eventually what happens is like you get dissatisfied with your current condition enough that the pain of staying that way feels too great. And the moment the pain of remaining the same is higher than the pain of making a change, boom, change happens just like that. It's just the way it goes. The people are motivated by avoiding pain. And that's kind of the way that college football works too. That it's sort of secretly why I think that some teams do play better coming off a loss, because they know what a loss feels like and they want to avoid that pain. And if you haven't experienced that, then maybe it's kind of hard to kind of conjure up that feeling. But once that's fresh in your mind, you're like, ooh, this sucks. I don't want to feel this way ever again. And so therefore you kind of play to avoid that feeling. And that's kind of what some of this kind of ends up being sometimes of. It's not the fact that it's so great to win. It's the fact that you view it as so terrible to lose that you try to stay out in front of that. Marcus Chafin says Dogs win by 17, close first half. We pull away after halftime, just a gut feeling. Hey, I hope you're right. That'd be great. Let's see what else. James Crump says, to me, I feel like the national media does not want Georgia to win the national championship this season. Last season, the national media did not feel like we could win it. Yeah, I don't know that I necessarily get that same sense. I mean, like the stuff that a lot of us felt prior to the Tennessee game, where it seemed like everybody was looking for any chance they could to discount Georgia. I have to admit, we really haven't seen a ton of that yet. Now, Connor was referencing some of that from the press conference today. Maybe there was more of that then, and maybe when I have a chance to watch that in its entirety, maybe I'll say, okay, here is some of that doubting and some of that questions. But, I mean, you can go back and watch those shows from back in November. I mean, I was furious. I mean, there was an edge to most of DawgNation going into that Tennessee game because there was outright, mocking of Georgia for even, believing they could, beat this mighty Tennessee team. That was real. That was happening. We gave you the examples of that on the show. I haven't gotten nearly that same vibe about this game. I just haven't. And I'm actually kind of comfortable if that were true. At the beginning of the year, we were told, and think about how mad we got in the summer when they were praising Ohio State. We did shows about Ohio State back in the summer because we thought they were being praised more than they deserved in comparison to a Georgia team that won the national championship. But all that talk has not really materialized this week. The stuff that people were saying about Ohio State in the summer, the kind of benefit of the doubt they were giving them, they weren't giving to Georgia, and we cited this at the time. I haven't heard that here right now. So, James, you may be right, and there may be people who would cite examples to back up your point. I would say for me, my own personal experience here is that the level of skepticism that existed for Georgia before the season and the extraordinary level of skepticism that existed prior to the Tennessee game, I haven't seen as much of that before this game. Let's see what else. Over here on YouTube for a moment. Greg Rosenberg says the most exciting football game I've ever seen live was the 2018 Rose Bowl against Oklahoma. I thought it was the game of the century. Wouldn't complain or be surprised if this one was similar. Boy, that'd be interesting. And I do think that so Georgia's won the national championship now, and it may go on to win a national championship here this year too. And who knows how the future may play out. Georgia may win many championships in the future. That may all happen. But I don't think that does anything to take away from the fact that Rose Bowl in 2017 was just a special moment in time. It just was. It was one of the great games in Georgia program history. It was one of the great Rose Bowls of all time. It was one of the great college football playoff games of all time. Because let's be honest here for a moment. In the college football playoff, and I'm not good enough to do the math, but you've had 3 games a year since 2014. So in the entirety of all the college football playoff games that have ever happened, there aren't that many of them that have been really all that good, right? There have been a lot of blowouts, a lot of not very close games, a lot of, poorly matched teams. So in the history of the playoff, there haven't been a lot of great playoff games. This was one of the best ever, one of the best Rose Bowls ever, one of the best Georgia games ever, however you want to slice it up. So I'm right there with you that 2021 will be a very special moment for me forever. But the 2017 Rose Bowl will belong alongside that in my mind for a long time to come, too. Well, let's see what else. Jonathan Aaron says 305 is not only how many days till we beat the Gators again, it's also how many days since you started on YouTube. Plus, I sent you a pretty good golden shoe. Jonathan, I'm sorry I missed that. We'll see if we can get the golden shoe in there. And I guess I'll take the L for not starting on YouTube soon enough. Uncle Lou says I don't say championship right. What do I say, championship? So it's one of those things where, like, if you listen to me speak for long enough, you're going to hear me mispronounce a lot of words. A lot of words. That's just one of those things where, and I try not to. I have a tendency to talk a little bit fast, and I really, really try not to. But sometimes the more I try, the faster I get. Some of these times, anyway. And there are probably some words that end up being not quite pristinely pronounced, and championship may be one of those for me. Because that extra syllable, I just can't quite get it. Championship. I'm not quite sure my lips work that way. Championship. Let's see what else. Frank Batterson says, what's your rushing yards prediction for the game? Free the toss sweep. I'd love for that number to start with a 2. That'd be fun. I'd love for that to be the case. That'd be awesome. Jay Lightfoot says he says the same way that I do. Yeah, there are certain words like that you just kind of do. It's like when I was growing up, everybody would say, instead of saying every day, everybody pretty much just said every day. That's the way. Like I said that. That's just kind of the way. There's a lot of omitted syllables in a lot of the words that I've probably grown up using, unfortunately. League go downs, by the way, calling for 250 yards on the ground. Boy, if that be the case, we're going to be popping champagne by the time midnight gets here. That's good stuff. How about this? William Perry was at the 92 Citrus Bowl, which I guess technically took place in 1993. That's really awesome. That's really, really cool to have been there at that game. I was not. But that's really fun. William, I'll have to hear more about that one day. That's really cool. Good stuff. Greg Rosenberg, thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate that. It's very nice. Thank you very much. Buddy Lee Z says, how did you come up with all of the great content on a daily basis without sounding like you're saying the same thing, being that you're the only host? Do you have help? So here is the way that we kind of operate around here is that. So it's one of those things where I love the preparation part of the show. I love thinking about what we're going to talk about. And so in my mind, I'm always kind of like thinking about the slots. Top of the show, just before the guest, right after the guest, right before we go off the air. And so in my mind, I'm always kind of walking around during the day. It's one of those things where I have the world's greatest job. And one of the things about the job is the fact that you're never quite completely done with it because you're always kind of thinking about the next show. And so I'm always in my mind when I see something or when somebody shares something with me. A lot of the stuff that we talk about here ends up being things that y'all have shared with me. Thankfully, I've got people like you who will hit me up on Twitter or like send it to the comment sections or something like that. And some of that kind of stuff ends up being fodder for the show. But in my mind, I'm kind of always thinking about those slots of do I have something for this? Do I have something for that? Is the show full? Do we have enough stuff? And I just thankfully enjoy that part of the job. And that's kind of how we've always kind of gotten to this. I kind of got my start doing some sports radio. If you ever like listen to sports radio, that's kind of how I got my start. And way back a long time ago, I used to do shows in the weekend, and it'd be like 4 hours on Saturday, 4 hours on Sunday. A lot of these were in the summertime when you didn't have a ton going on. And so that's one of those things. If you ever want to be a broadcaster, stuff like this is really good for you, because it's like what you talk about when there's nothing to talk about. How do you stretch that part of your brain to sort of find something to talk about? That's one of those things that thankfully early in my career, I got a chance to kind of stretch that muscle. You've heard like people like Malcolm Gladwell talk about like 10,000 hours and things like that. I don't quite know that I got 10,000 hours in. I don't really know. Maybe it was more than that. Maybe it was less than that. I'm not quite so sure. But I spent a long time doing a lot of shows just trying to find something to talk about. And over the course of time, hopefully anyway, you kind of develop that muscle that gives you a chance to sort of figure out what's going to be interesting, what the audience might respond to, how you can kind of present the topic of Georgia football, something we all love and care about in an interesting way. And so I appreciate your kind words, buddy. I really do. For instance, here's the kind of thing that y'all share with me that I always find to be interesting. Marlon says, Ohio State's 0-9 versus SEC teams in bowl games, and this year they're softer than ever. So there you go. Is that really true? Some of the Facebook folks can be writing that down and using that against the Facebook troll over there. Has Ohio State really never beaten an SEC? Well, no, they beat Alabama in the 2014 game. So that's at least one SEC win they got. They did beat Bama in was it the Sugar Bowl in 2014? So they did win that one. Jay Lightfoot says that J.J. Watt's retiring. How about that? Great career. Let's see what else. James Moore says it's going to be 0-10. So there you go. Christy checks in to say, Christy's going back and forth with somebody. Listen, there's a lot of folks in our comment section that come fully loaded every day, and Christy is certainly one of those. Green Soldier says the actual right answer is 2-9. So you got the Bama win in 2014, and I'm not quite so sure I know what the other one is, but there you go on that. James Moore, thanks for the kind words. Let me go to DawgNation.com for a minute. Randy Hall earlier asked about Smoke Bowie. I haven't heard about anything on that in a while. I'm guessing that that's still a chance for Georgia to have some good news, but I haven't heard anything on that. The other one that's interesting to me is Grayson McCall. Like, where is Grayson McCall going to go? Because at one point in time, he's maybe going to go to Auburn, but then he canceled his visit there. I guess he did visit Florida, but then Florida ended up taking Graham Mertz. Doesn't it seem like the McCall thing was like really noisy for a while? Now it's not noisy at all. I find that to be a little bit interesting. Charles Womack says, I dislike the narrative of UGA becoming the next Bama. When Nick Saban showed up, no one said Bama's going to be the next LSU. Georgia's the next Georgia. Hashtag go for 2 in 22. Totally understand where you're coming from on that, Charles, and I think you have every right to say what you're saying. I guess the one thing, though, that to me has always just been kind of a fact of life, because coaches hate this kind of stuff. Coaches don't like comparing players to players or like eras for certain teams to eras of another team. Kirby does not ever like doing that. But one way or another, sports fans just sort of speak the language of comparisons. They just sort of do. And you're probably right that the comparisons never quite work out as evenly matched as sometimes we kind of assume them to be. But that doesn't really stop sports fans from speaking in the language of comparison, whether it's accurate or not. But you're absolutely right, is that Georgia's not trying to match Alabama. Georgia is trying to be the best version of Georgia. You're absolutely right in saying that. Kent Holcomb says, we have too much depth for Ohio State to be hanging close in the second half. Georgia pulls away after halftime for a 17-21 point win. So there you go. I told you there's some confident UGA fans. And indeed, that's the case. The Real BA's listening face, which is a very funny username, says, Connor just asked CJ Stroud a question on the SEC network and the feed got cut off. There you go. Hopefully Connor didn't trip the break or anything. There you go. A. Chandler wants 8 sacks. I'll tell you this. If Georgia gets 8 sacks, I may be doing the postgame show standing on a table somewhere. That would be fantastic. Let's see what else. Back on Facebook one more time. Yeah, Hugh Nash also says, Connor just asked CJ Stroud a question. Yeah, so Connor said the same thing. Or Hugh says the same thing. The feed got cut off for Connor. You hate to see that. Barry Watkins on the subject of canceled flights. I mean, listen, I have been noticing that. Let me just tell you that because, like the LA travel stuff is not easy right now. And so you got to have a little something planned just in case, thankfully, mine is cancelable if need be. But some of the stuff that's been going on with these canceled flights has got me a little nervous. Scotty G says, make sure to take that tree down. Don't be that guy. So I'm a big believer, Scotty, and I understand what you're saying. Nobody wants to leave their decorations up too long. But I'm a big believer that it's absolutely appropriate to keep decorations up to New Year's Day. I mean, that's absolutely appropriate. Listen, my house still looks like, I'm talking about my actual house, not my studio, but my actual house still looks, as Christmas as it can be and will be. We're still watching Christmas movies and listening to Christmas songs. We're still doing all that. We still got all that going on. Now, post-New Year's Day, I'm kind of ready for that to be done. Although there are some people, traditionalists, I guess, that celebrate the 12 days of Christmas. Like, am I right? That begins on the 25th. So if you're a 12-day of Christmas celebrator, which maybe you should be, you still got a lot of Christmas left to go, which I'm always in favor of more Christmas. So I get the point you're making because some people do leave their decorations up too long. But I don't have any problem leaving up a tree to January, and maybe one of these days we'll start doing 12 days of Christmas and start leaving that thing up until a week into the new year. Angie Young says, "Amen. Leave the tree up and never take them down before New Year's." Yeah, no doubt. Now listen, this is one of those things I've sort of changed my belief on. I used to be really big that December 26th, this was back when I was younger, December 26th, Christmas is over. But when you get to be a little older, what I've kind of discovered is Christmas is a lot of work. And so the idea that you're going to do all this work to kind of keep it sort of confined to this very small window of time, honestly, I've just sort of softened my stance on that. My kids will start decorating for Christmas with my wife beginning in November. I'm sort of fine with that now, and we'll keep it up at New Year. Now, after New Year's Day, I don't like it. I don't like it. So I don't know that I ever actually could be a 12-day of Christmas celebrator because that gets a little late for me. But until New Year's Day, you better believe that's the case. You better believe that's the case. Jerry Popham says, New Year's Day for watching the parade and wall-to-wall football. Christmas tree comes down on the 2nd. That's about what I would do. That is about what I would do. You're absolutely right about that. You're absolutely right about that. Christina Stevens also agrees there, too. So, Christina, thanks for weighing in. Let's see what else. Sandy Price says if Georgia actually wins the championship, we can pronounce it any way we want, which I guess is about right there, too. Yeah, that's indeed the case. Scotty G says his neighbors leave up Christmas decorations until the following Thanksgiving. Yeah, I do get that. Miriam Corbin says Christmas is a ton of work. I'm exhausted after Christmas. Yeah, it's worth it, but it's a lot of work. There's no doubt that's the case. Graham Nicholson says New Year's Day is going to be anticlimactic after we win the previous night. That's the kind of anticlimactic feeling I can live with for sure. Hugh Nash says, just thinking about taking down my lights outside makes me want to lie down. Hugh, I understand where you're coming from on that, too. All right, final comments. We got to go. Lord, Christie's over here. She's still giving to somebody. Telling you, y'all better not mess with Christy now. You're going to regret that. You're going to regret that. Jonathan Aaron says, if we're not able to fly out, are you going to drive or take the train? So I looked at driving because, I've always wanted to do a cross-country drive. So I looked at driving. I know some people that drove to the Rose Bowl a few years ago. So I would do it, but it's 36 hours. And so if you drove 12 hours a day, that's 3 days. So that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work. And what I mean is it takes me away from work a lot. So I really did look into this to say, hey, what would it be like, because we're like the Griswolds. We want to take our kids to all the states. And if you go I-40 to L.A., you can go through Oklahoma and part of Texas and then New Mexico through Arizona. I mean, you can really hit some states. Like, you can hit some states if you drive. But it's also 3 days, like 3 hard days. So MJ says, you don't want that smoke, BA. Yeah, I mean, just driving to Miami last year was hard. So the idea I'm going to drive 36 hours to L.A., that would be hard. But if Georgia is to win, I'm not missing the game. So if my airline cancels every flight between here and, Kingdom Come, I'm going to be in L.A. somehow, some way. I am. I'm going to be in L.A. somehow, some way. So if I have to drive, that's what I'll do. But no, I mean, that's a long drive. Hugh says, I need a Madden bus since I hate to fly. I don't really hate to fly. I just kind of like to drive. I do. I like seeing nice scenery. I like to do that. So I really don't hate to fly. If it's drivable, my preference is to probably drive. But I'm not, necessarily averse to flying. Had the drive been a little shorter, we might try to pull it off. But man, that's a long drive. There you go. All right, we got to get ready to go. Sequoia Dog says we're 3 hours from LA. I can handle that. So there you go. Yeah. I mean, listen, Georgia's got more business to take care of before you get to that point in time, but if it happens, we'll do what it takes to get there. All right, we got to go for now. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. By the way, R.S. Andrews is one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that. Water heater goes out. In any case, R.S. Andrews can replace it for you the same day. Heating system, last few days, you've probably been very thankful to have it. Well, if you're worried that yours is not going to make it through the rest of the winter, go ahead and get it tuned back up to factory fresh specs. It's a great way to ring in the new year with a toasty, warm heating system right there in your house. So R.S. Andrews can help you with that. rsandrews.com for more. Enjoy that with them, and then we'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We'll also be live for Go for 2 and 22 later on today. A lot of coverage getting you ready for the Peach Bowl. We'll talk to you then, everybody.